is Shylo, Bijold, and you are listening to Grit and Grace. Good afternoon or evening, everybody. This is Shylo, Bijold. We are on another episode of Grit and Grace, and today is a very special episode. We have an incredible woman, an advocate, a survivor, an ambassador, and just an incredible human with us. Today, welcome Jayne Jones.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Jayne, I am so excited. So first and foremost, how I know you is because we are connected through some people, and then all of a sudden it was like fangirls each way. Like, I'm like, I like this. I like and we were back and forth. We got into some women's groups, and I really just, the real and rawness of what you bring is why I was so attracted to you, and why I ultimately asked you on the show is you took a huge step out of a comfort zone this week. And I was like, whoa, I've wanted you on the show for a while, but then I read that and I'm like, oh, no, now is the time, because you have been on my list, I'll be honest. And I have just been like, who's got a great story? And that's really what this is all about, is we just want to share the stories. But first, before we go into what that topic was, because it's a tough topic, but it's a topic that needs to come out. We need to start normalizing trauma. And I talk a lot of trauma on this show. I laugh about it, not because I think trauma is funny, but we need to make these conversations so much more safer and easily like, hey, oh, you got touched too when you were a kid. I'm not downplaying it. What I'm saying is we need to make it that simple, that people don't feel ashamed to say, hey, I had this happen to me. And we want to open those doors for people. So that's really the point of the show. It's really gone in that direction, and I'm proud of that direction. And you are a big part of that, because even though you have not joined the show yet, there are a lot of things you do in your women's group that's really important. So we're going to share that too, so people can find you at the end of this. But okay, so you're a Canadian, eh?
Yes. And like you said earlier, I think it's been a little over a year since I first connected with you. We met through just some same people that we know through health and wellness. And I remember watching very soon into that journey of the health and wellness piece of my life. I remember seeing an interview with you that the company had on one of their meetings, and you were just so authentic about your story. And you know, there were similarities to your childhood that I could completely relate to. And you shared your stuff in such a way that there was humor, there was, tenderness and grace given to the people that, that hurt us, that are still in our lives, that we don't want to in turn create a trauma for by sharing our stuff. And I was just like, so blown away by that style. And I have the same kind of style where I do like to talk about things, and a lot of times I have dark humor or sharp wit, and that's a coping mechanism of mine, but it's also my family's style of humor. So, sometimes people don't find that funny, but my one friend and I, who grew up very similar, very kind of neglected and, alcoholic environments, we both find it hilarious that we basically grew up in the back seats of our parents' cars, and that we made jokes, that we only grew to the height of our environment. Had we been in bigger cars, we would be these taller women. So, and so watching you and a few other ladies that I admire, I knew it was time to do something that I had wanted to do, and that was to start a women's group on Facebook. And social media is tough, and I'm not a guru at all the platforms, so I only really know Facebook. And I thought, you know what, I have education in peer support for mental health issues, and I have a lot of past trauma, and I'm going to just start this group, and whoever wants to come can come. and I'm going to share stories about myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it evolved really fast. Like, I still am really the kind of person that if I get 15 likes on a meme that I think is hilarious, I think I'm having a big day. I'm a big deal. So I don't have this huge following on social media, but my women's group just took off, and I shared some really, non-professional live videos telling some particular stories, and it just went from there. And I knew that this particular story about surviving domestic violence was my end game at some point. It was the biggest thing I wanted to work my way up to sharing, and I just didn't know when that would be or what that would look like. Because I feel like a lot of the other traumas in my childhood and my life and with my parents, I feel like a lot of those have come full circle and people have healed and come back together. But this one topic was the one I was very afraid to approach.
So before we go into that story, let's just go into a few things. So the women's group was one of the ways I really got to kind of dig in and know you. Dark humor, my family too. When you talk about our coping mechanisms, me and my brothers, which I'll have both my brothers on the show eventually here, probably at the end of the season, because it's going to tie in kind of everything that makes sense. We have, I think, the best sense of humor on the planet, because we will laugh about the darkest stuff. Like, people can be sitting by us and they'll be like, are they serious or not? And we're not, but we have learned to cope with all of our trauma. And here's another thing I'll say, it says that you built to get to this final story. I truly don't believe you can truly heal starting at that big story. You have to start healing the little things and kind of going like this and going, oh yeah, this. And then that layer opens up another layer and you're like, and this, and then I got to heal this. And then I got to heal this, until you get to the point where you're like, it doesn't matter anymore. I can talk about it. Now I can go here. And that's, I feel like my last 7 years was coming out into social media and being the one who's, honest, like authentic, real, raw. But was I?
Yeah.
I wasn't telling half that story. There was so much people didn't know about me. I always felt fake. And so I think a lot of people feel that way, because you're not supposed to go, you don't want to have to go air all your stuff out on social media. That's not what we're saying. But when you're healed, it's much easier to have those stories. When you're not ready, you can't share that, because it's not going to come from a good place, or it's going to come from a place of trauma. It's going to come from a place of being a victim. Now, and here's the other part of this before we go into the story. Survivor is an amazing thing to be called. But when someone is a victim, here's the difference. Everyone can be a victim, and there is nothing wrong with that. There are a lot of victims. Almost everybody has something that's happened to them, if not everybody in the world, that can call them a victim. The difference between the victim is a victim will grow and become a survivor, or the victim stays a victim and it becomes their story. And that's what we get away from. And we want to help people say, hey, we know that you've been a victim, but this is how we can grow and can heal each other. And it's not just a Facebook group. It's us as a collective, as human beings, coming together and healing each other with each other. I think that's really important. And I think what you're doing is incredible. Like I said, you're an ambassador. You're big in your community. You have degrees in mental health. You do things with homeless. We could go on and on about the things you do. But today it's a special show about domestic violence, because your story needs to be heard for many people struggling. And I have a little bit of emotion behind this, because I've lost 5 friends or colleagues to domestic violence over the last 3 years. When COVID hit, we lost 3 colleagues, and I was not close to them. I'm not going to claim I was best friends. I don't do that. What hurts me is that it should not have happened. There's no excuse for it, but it's happening. And not just to women, to children, and even men can be abused too. I don't want to take it away. So men and women can have this happen. And I had somebody I went to high school with, and this is a very terrible story. He hit his wife. He murdered his wife. and it was really sad. And I'm not going to name names, but the children were there. It was horrific. And it was like people have been put in pressure cookers, and it's crazy. And so I'm nothing but love to the families, and I have nothing to say. I'm not going to, exploit what happened. Most people won't know who I'm talking about, but if you do, just know that there's a lot of love, and say a prayer for the families, both sides, because everybody's hurting. But let's go to your story. So obviously this is an emotional topic for me. And I haven't been in that place, but I know enough people, including my own mother, who has. And so, and multiple times. And thankfully, we are survivors. We survived that.
Yeah.
But not everybody does. And not everybody has a story. They can't share the story. So let's talk about that. Let's start with, you had a Facebook post. And first of all, where did that come from? Like when
the
you
Facebook post?
Yeah, when you were like, what in you said it's time today?
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question, because this story, this experience I lived through is almost 20 years old. This story happened for pretty much the entirety of my 20s. And now I'm in my late 40s. So, why now, right? And well, there's a really simple answer for that. I was in a town about an hour from where I live here, and they have this really nice little quaint store. I love to go to it, and they have, really beautiful clothes, and they have a little bookstore, and just really cool things you can go in and buy. So of course I went in there, and as I walked back to the book section, so this is probably about 2 months ago, I walk up to the book table with the current display of books, and front and center is a book presented, and there's the face of, for the entirety of my 20s, he had written a memoir, and it had just been released.
So for a second, because you cut out, let's go back.
Oh,
who was the book? That was the only part that cut out. So I just want to get
okay. So I walked in, and displayed front row center a couple months ago was the book written by my ex-spouse of when I was in my 20s, and this experience, the person I was living with, he wrote a memoir. And now, for those who know absolutely nothing about me or him, he's not just an average Canadian who decided to just write a book about himself. He, first of all, he's 20 years older than me. He is from the Indigenous community in Canada, and he's considered a very big role model. He's a famous Canadian Indigenous musician. So, he's spent the bulk of his life, he has spent touring and traveling and playing really big shows for, Indigenous festivals and just all over the place. So, and his other kind of big claim to fame that he was very well known for is that he owned a string of nightclubs, and they hired and catered to predominantly Indigenous people. So there was live bands that played, and those musicians were hired from the Indigenous community. The bar staff, the waitresses, they were all hired Indigenous community. So he's pretty famous, and he's a fixture in the Indigenous community, which I guess added to me not speaking up for a long time after I escaped the situation. In Canada, Canada has treated the First Nations people horribly. absolutely horribly. It's a very, very big topic in this country. And we're supposed to be working through truth and reconciliation with all the horrible things that were done to Indigenous families. Mm-hmm. So with that being such a huge thing in Canada, and myself having human rights background, a ton of my community service is done in the Indigenous community presently. I was really afraid of just that part of telling the story, being a white woman and, standing up against a powerful man, a public figure, and someone from the Indigenous community who has a tremendous amount of fans and followers. It just adds more layers to the complexity of speaking up about it.
I think this is an important part of the story too, because many women, and I will say I can speak for women, what happens with women and why they don't speak up. And this is where people will say, why didn't you say something? Well, because number one, when you're standing up to somebody in a position of power, big or small, it's very scary. When you're in your 20s, when you were younger, I always say women over 40 and older are zero fucks. We don't care. We get to a point where I don't give a shit. And here's the thing. Yeah. But we don't give a shit. But when I think about who I was in my 20s and I look at some of the things that have happened, I'm like, God, I'm such a different person now. I would have handled that so different. This is part of the journey. So many young women they don't understand, and that's not their fault. You shouldn't have to. As a young woman, this is you shouldn't have to, but you need to know. And so when you get to this age of 40, you're kind of I don't care anymore. But when you look at what the situation was, you probably depended on him for money. You probably, when you think about power, it's not just power like a famous person. There could be, maybe he's the income earner. Maybe people put him up on a pedestal. Maybe he's the CEO of something. Maybe he's just the boss. Doesn't matter. When there's a position of power and you're a young girl, and even older women, I'm not saying this doesn't happen with older women. I'm just saying that this is how it can happen early and it can just keep going. So I think it's really important to talk about that because, there's a lot of women so afraid because that person is in a position of power. And now I said before, it can happen to men too, same thing, but it happens a lot like this with women because the men are in a position of power. They're also a man. It does change it. I hate to say it, but it's still like that. And you had a lot stacked against you. And when you have a community, and this is a pillar of the community, it's even harder. And you did say it. You're a white woman. Now you've got a totally different bag of obstacles that you're trying, to get through whatever happens. So let's dig into the story now. So we know the background. You got this book. What did he say in the book? What did he say in the book that you were like, wait a minute?
Well, I would love to say I didn't support the book, but I mean, I wasn't going to stand in the bookstore and bend all the pages and read the whole book. I bought the book. Who's not going to buy the book? I was just so, and it's because within seconds of picking up that book and looking in the book, my name was in it, my full name.
Oh boy.
There was no anonymity for me. And I couldn't believe, I thought, this isn't how it works on TV. On TV, they would tell the person, someone's putting a book out and you have to give permission. But I guess that's not in the real world how it works, because he named me in the book first and last, maiden name. I'm married now, so my last name now is different than what is in the book. But still, it takes people in this day and age, it takes them 2 seconds to research things, so if they wanted to know who I was, more about me, it would take them seconds to, from reading his book. And I really felt annoyed that my full name was in the book. I felt like, first of all, somebody, one of his people, whoever, could have asked me. I might have been okay with my first name, you know, but he didn't even have to say my name. You know, he could have alluded to the person he was with for X period of time.
There's ways of being professional about things. And when people choose not to be, well, then you open up another can of worms for yourself, because the other side of the story eventually comes out, and that's what's going to happen. But no names. You don't mention names, because that's low level, in my opinion.
It is.
Go there. So, okay, I will be honest. If my ex came out with a memoir, like my first husband, first of all, what is this? I'd be like, I'm reading this as well, because what are you going to say about that situation? Because everybody's got a different, okay. So the other part of this is everybody's truth is theirs. Their way of saying what they thought, that is theirs. Right. So there's nothing wrong with it. But the fact that he outed your name and wasn't like, no holds barred it, it's like, now I am going to care, because you just put me in the hot seat. So that's very tough. So you got the book. Yeah.
And there was, you know, I certainly wasn't the only woman named in the book. Everybody was named, you know, so I have no idea. I don't know the other women, but anyways, that was the piece. There was two pieces that kept driving me nuts. Like I've already mentioned, I'm short. My husband now is very tall. There was one point where he had to take the book and put it somewhere really high, so that I had to stop looking at the book for a couple of days till I could find a ladder to get the book back down and start up again. But, you know, like the fact that he named me, just, it didn't feel like abuse. That's not right. It just felt like he took my power away again all these years later. Like he was so arrogant and, you know, in my perspective, narcissistic, to just tell this story and not even care the way he's describing these women. And I felt for a couple of the other women in the book too that I hadn't known about. But the worst part of the book was the way he described our breakup. In this book, he says, now I've always been an animal person and a horse person and involved in the horse world and horse friends. And at that time that we were splitting up, I was gaining momentum in having my own life and my own friends again, which I hadn't had for many years. And the only reason that happened was because we had moved around different provinces while he was opening his bars. When we were in those other provinces, I had nobody. I didn't have a network. I didn't have people. I worked for him, so I didn't have any money. I didn't get a paycheck, you know, so kind of going back to what you had touched on, sometimes there's financial abuse or, you know, someone that you require. And, you know, that was very much the situation. But when we finally moved back to Manitoba, the final year we were together, I started to have some friends and venture out. And through that, I had started including a couple of his nieces in coming over to ride horses. Now, they would come and they would ride horses with my friends, and they loved it. And one of the girls was 12 and one was 16-ish. And it was his brother's stepchildren. And in the book, he says that we split up because I decided to go and invest all my money in a saddlery. So like a company that sells saddles for horses. For those aren't horse people, the saddle that people ride on the horse with, he suggested that I had gone and spent all my money and started this company, and that he was really against it. So that's what split us up. First of all, I could I didn't have my own money. I could barely afford the saddle for my own horse. Like, and he says that in the book, he says that I did this with a neighboring farm and friend. And absolutely nothing of that sort happened. Like, I did not have money to start any kind of company, never mind, a leather smithing company that makes saddles that would cost just thousands upon thousands of dollars to start. Like, it was just absolutely outlandish. Like, it doesn't sound like a big deal, like, oh, could have said something worse, Yeah, but it's still a complete lie. And the reason the lie bothers me so much is that my perspective of why our relationship ended was because the young girls I mentioned, his step nieces, and their mom phoned me one night. I was alone at the farm. He and his brother, so the stepdad of these young girls, so he and his brother, the stepdad, are away in another province playing with their band. And the girls' mom and the girls came and showed up at my house at about 8 p.m. at night. And they phoned first and they said they really needed to speak to me. And it was like that kind of phone call, that sounding of a voice, this is not good. Like, your heart drops, especially because they're not going to tell you right then and there. So I had to wait a good half hour for them to arrive. And they came in, they sat down at my kitchen table, and the mom looks at me and says, "You need to know that my spouse," she named him, "has been molesting my youngest daughter." And I certainly didn't mean her either. And then they looked at me, and it was very awkward because the girls were there too. Like, I felt like we could have maybe had more conversation if the girls weren't there. It felt like it's not appropriate. Like, I get that she brought probably the daughter so that I would believe, like, maybe she felt she needed to do that for me to believe it, to hear it from the young girl too, which I did. The young girl, very open about it. And like, it takes my breath away now, like, that is one of the most horrible things I've ever been presented with in my life. I've had a lot in my life, and that relationship certainly wasn't my only bad relationship, but this particular thing is one of the most horrible things you could hear about a person you've been living with for almost 10 years, that you, like, I remember sitting there, and I remember it just going through my mind, like, trying to think of every time the girls had been over, trying to think like exactly what we did, because we didn't stay on my property that much, trying to think where he was, like, how are people situated that, he would have had this opportunity. And like, it just was going through my mind like crazy. Like, and I didn't really have people or family. I'm an only child. At that point, I was still estranged from my parents. I didn't know what to do, and they weren't leaving. They wanted to stay and talk. So I literally phoned up my mom's brother, who I hadn't even seen or talked to in years. And I asked if him and his wife could come to my place, that it was an absolute emergency. And could they just come from the city? And I'll explain why when they get there, because I felt like I was afraid to be alone in that situation. And I just, like, I literally had that people to turn to, that I reached out to a family member I wasn't having a relationship with and hadn't seen in forever.
So let's stop for a second, because you just caught me on, I caught something in this. Another thing that is common is that when somebody is in this position, they also make sure that you are limited to who you talk to, i.e., your family isn't around, you don't have a lot of friends. That's on purpose. You know, this is part of the control. And what people don't understand is at first it seems like they love you. They must love me so much. I don't need to have any friends. I don't need to see my family. You know, that doesn't mean that you don't. It just means there's a way. It's that form of being able to control the situations in all forms. So
yes,
you had these girls there, and in your play, I could imagine what that's like, because just playing all the motions in your mind, like, when did this happen? How did this happen? But then was there a point, and this, I could be wrong, was there a point where you kind of started clicking and going, okay, yes? Or how long did it take you to really accept it? Or were you right away like, yeah, this is it? I mean, that's a shock.
Yeah, I feel like I was in shock. I don't know if it was like in that moment at my kitchen table or after everyone left my house, but the piece about it being this information coming from a 12-year-old girl, you know, that was the part that I was grappling with. Like, did this happen? I knew at this point, because this was the last year of our life together. And this moment at the kitchen table ended up being the last of maybe a few months. Like, I don't remember exactly how long it took to like get him out. And you know, that's another part of the story. But I, at this point, had a lot of women over the years that were working in his nightclubs, or that were friends of mine that would just make a phone call to my house and he'd get the phone instead of me. I had enough women come to me and say, you know, your spouse, he's been bothering me and he's been saying inappropriate things and he has told me not to tell you. And I am ashamed to say, like, the first time it happened, it was about 7 months into our relationship and we moved. So we were together for 6 months in the province I live in now, Manitoba. And that was like, you know, I was 20 and he was 40, and I got asked to come work at his bar because they were short of people. A friend of mine worked there, and I went there. I didn't have a clue who he was. And, you know, we gradually started to know who each other was, and he started being, you know, super friendly and hilarious. And, you know, of course, his band was playing there. And, you know, so those first 6 months, I didn't see anything like that. And because of that, I made a choice to move away with him. Well, month 7, a month into moving away to another province where this is where it starts, where I have zero money, no vehicle, no friends. Like I said before, not involved with my family. He's 20 years my senior. And it was in that first month that a waitress came forward and said this. And I was like, what? Like, at that point, I seriously didn't believe it. Like, because all the bad pieces hadn't started happening yet. You know, the game was just beginning. Mm-hmm. And I didn't believe the first girl. I didn't. And now, if I could go back, like, and the rest of it, a lot of it was kept from me. You know, people didn't tell me and nobody talked to me. Again, you know, back to I was 20 years old, a Caucasian female. He was 20 years my senior. We were now completely surrounded by the Indigenous community. Like, everything we did was now within the Indigenous community, including his new bar he had opened. And every trip we went on, it might be a fly-in reserve or another reserve. Like I was always, you know, pretty much only white person. And I suffered a lot of racism, you know, like everybody called me Whitey as a joke. Like that was my nickname, you know, but I didn't enjoy it. It felt like most women despised me. It felt, you know, his family was horrible to me. He had a son who was older than me and was married to this woman, and they were just so mean all the time. Like they would call me the child bride, and you know, very shaming to me. You know, I always felt like I was being shamed. And this one sister-in-law of his was older and a pretty respected woman. Like she was an author and involved in lawmaking and changing treaties. And, you know, she hurt me so much all the time. Like she would come to our house and I admired her. You know, she was a force to be reckoned with. She was a woman who was doing things, big things. I was already in university, free law, like with the plans that I wanted to be a lawyer. And I wanted her to like me. I wanted to have conversations with her. Like this woman changed laws, but she would be so condescending. Like I never forget this one incident where I was like, you know, you're staying with us. I'm going to run out to the grocery store. Is there anything specific, you know, that I can get for you that you enjoy while you're staying here? And she said, I would really like some Spartan apples. And I said, okay. And I don't know if I wasn't thinking or what, but I said, how, like in Canada, like in a grocery store, there's so many apples, right? And I cared so much. I wanted to make sure I was going to get the right apple. And I said, how will I know which ones are the Spartan apples? And she's like, can you read? It will say Spartan. And she like sounded it out for me. And my cheeks just like, I just remember like burning up. Like,
it sounds like a lot of verbal abuse from him. A lot of verbal abuse. And so when women were coming forward, were they coming forward saying they were sexual with him, or were they coming forward saying he was harassing them?
They were coming forward saying he was harassing them, like that they were not interested. And I know now from there is one person in that family that is still my friend, very good friend, does not have any relationship with the whole family. I know that there were many women that he was unfaithful with, that, you know, were consenting adults, you know. But another really strange incident that happened right, again, probably the 7th month we were together. So like, again, just after this move to Edmonton, the RCMP came to our door one day. So the Royal Canadian Mounted Police knocked on our door and asked for my husband. And he went to the door, and this officer said, we've had this report of you calling a wrong number and bothering the young woman who answered. And I was like I remember standing in the background thinking like, it's crazy, like that, what, you know. And but later, much later, when I think about that incident, you know, it just, there's no doubt in my mind that happened, because, you know, in this relationship over the years, the more I was isolated, the more I, you know, was probably groomed. Like, I, you know, I was very isolated. I did not have friends in our environment. I did not have money. I've already established that. I he had this very intense, angry side to him. So, I was living in this situation where I was extremely unhappy and the person had zero empathy for me. Um, I just realized, like, I don't know, I was just afraid. I just remember feeling afraid all the time and wanting to know how to escape. And
was there ever, and not to cut you off, but was there ever violence, or was it always verbal?
It was mostly verbal and control, but and this is, I think, one of the particularly vulnerable pieces to speak about. There was a lot of sexual abuse towards me. And, I want to be very clear, like, I know a lot of different people who have different preferences in the type of relationship or the type of person. You know, that can look so different for so many people. And if it is consenting adults, I have no judgment. Live your life, love, be happy, whatever that combination of your relationship looks like. Whereas in my situation, I already didn't want to be around him. Like, I didn't even want to be touched by him. But he would constantly try to break me down. And this is where I feel shame and embarrassed to share this, but I'm going to, because I know there's someone else out there experiencing this. Like, he would constantly try to talk me into being willing to have group sex with people in his band. So, like, people I saw all the time, people, like, just random situations, he would just come up with it, and it would terrify me, because usually when he would come up with it, I'd be the only girl. We'd possibly be on the tour bus that went to the show. Just people in his band would be on there. And I'm wondering, oh my God, like, are they thinking, like, has he talked to them about this idea? Are they thinking this might happen? Like, are they gonna come at me? Like, clearly he had no respect for me, because I was clearly always telling him, absolutely not. That's not me. I'm not doing it. Like, forget it. Like, it didn't matter how scared I was of him. I was not doing it, because, I'm a very, very uncomfortable person. Like, I didn't have siblings, where you take your clothes off and get in your bathing suit and be around people, like, where you're used to changing and stuff. I'm very much like, even if my best friend of my whole life was here, I'd probably go in her closet and change my shirt, so I was absolutely not, participating in group sex. And again, I'm no judgment. I'm not saying that anyone and everyone who's participating in group sex is abused. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying consenting adults, people willingly wanting to be there. And this harassment about this topic went on for years. It was like, he just tried to break me down and wear me down. And I would just cry about it, because the suggestions would just get more disgusting. And, he would just completely, it was like he just would have this dialogue and completely ignore what I was saying. It was almost like he just went to a different place. And he wasn't drunk or on drugs. I should say this, like, he's very much a person who's also well known in the community of recovery. He talks about that himself. He mentors people or sponsors people, however you want to word it. So, that added another level of irony, because he was supposed to be 30 years sober, and very, again, like, this is someone's private business, but he very much puts it out there that that's part of his identity. And I just felt like, it just felt like a complete hypocrisy of someone who's supposed to be helping people heal their trauma.
Well, sobriety is interesting because a lot of times, and I'm an alcoholic, so when we give one thing up, sometimes something else pops up. And sexual addiction is just as much destroying and damaging as any other addiction. So there's a lot of addiction, food addiction. So, I mean, and I'm not saying, maybe that was when he was with you, maybe that was it. So I don't want to put judgment on him either, but we're just going off of your story. But at the same time, it sounds like you're in this position where you said something. How could he? He helps people. How could that be? He's beautiful. How could that be? He's such a this. You were in such a situation. So let's talk about how you got out of that situation, because you didn't have anything. And so you had to get out. So what did you do? And for anyone listening, what did you do? And what would you tell somebody who's looking to get out now that you can, we're older ladies, now we can help you. What did you do? And what would you tell a young girl now, or even a woman who may be in her 40s, there's a lot of women, doesn't matter what the age, dealing with this type of stuff. And sexual abuse is very much abuse. Verbal abuse is abuse. It doesn't, and I say this all the time, getting hit is wrong. Getting verbal abused is wrong. They're both wrong. They're both traumatic. They're both painful. Not one is worse than the other. But physical abuse, and we talked about at the beginning, verbal abuse can very much escalate into physical abuse as well. And it takes one time. It takes one time, and you might not get a second time. So let's talk about how you got out of this situation for our viewers, and what advice you would give somebody who's in a tough situation right now.
Okay. Yeah. And, again, I'm 48 now. At that time, I was like, there's so much more of this story. We could never share it all. It was a 9-year walk of my life, but I think that, I've given a pretty good picture. And for me, the breaking point was this situation where the allegation of molest was made. And the mom of the daughters and the 2 girls, they were not going back on it. Like, they put it out there, and then they went around to a lot of his family members. And he has a huge family, and sides were taken. So there was family members who believed him. First of all, he tried to pretend like it was nonsense, like it wasn't even real, like he didn't even take it seriously. I should add that after everyone left my house that night, I phoned him straight away. I didn't know what the way to handle this was, but at this point, I already don't want to. I've wanted to escape for a long time. So I'm not worried about his feelings. We are now living back in the province of Manitoba, right, where we came from in the beginning. So I'm back in a place where I do at least know a couple of people and have horse friends in the area. So I'm not as isolated as I was all the other years. I phoned him I feel like he was in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. And he is with the brother of the mom and kids making the allegation. And the brother had no idea this was coming either. Like, his girlfriend, like, they weren't his biological children, but they were living as a family unit. She didn't give him a heads up, I guess, that she was coming to do this.
Did the brother know before she told you?
I don't know, because he was very shocked to hear it. I know his brother knew about a lot of the inappropriate behavior. And like you had mentioned about addiction, sexual addiction, that is one of the programs he's always been in, and also help people recover. So I know his brother knows all of that stuff. Did he know that the young girl, had said this would happen to her? I don't know, because when I phoned the hotel and I spoke to my spouse, I said, I think you should know that your brother's name, is his girlfriend and the girls were just here, and a very terrible allegation has been made against you. And he didn't like, what? Okay, what was it? Like he didn't even show interest. He's like, oh yeah. And he was smoking. I could hear him smoking. He's like, oh yeah, what? And like, not in a, like he was not taking this seriously at all at this point, And to me, the minute someone uses the word allegation in connection to anything to do with me, I'd be like, okay, what? Like, what are we up against here? And so I told him, I said, well, younger girl, I said her name, has said you have been trying to molest her. That was her word. And that you keep telling her that it'll be your little secret. And does she have a fantasy? That was the sentences I remember out of it. And he was like, oh, okay. Like, not like mad, he's like, that's not true. He said that's not true, but not with like any kind of anger, shock, and he got off the phone immediately with me, must have had a conversation with his brother about it. And his brother calls me back. Now, his brother's money comes from being hired in this band. Mm-hmm. Not saying, but it is a dynamic. Like,
well, not only is it his brother, it's his employer. So again,
exactly,
there's a power here. There's a power.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. His brother phones me and says, well, I just don't know why names his girlfriend would come and say that. And I'm like, are you telling me you don't believe it then? Because I'm thinking, okay, I'm like, are you telling me you don't believe it? And he's like, oh, I just don't know what to think. I don't know why she would do that. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay. And they had to go. And that was all I heard from anybody for a few days till they came back from being out of province. And then by the time they got back is when a big division happened. The brother no longer was with brother. He went to the other side, and half the family was talking about this and half the family was on his side. And my spouse was acting like it wasn't even true and this is ridiculous. And I said to him, you can say that all you want, but there's a child involved here and she's made a very serious allegation. And you need to think about the fact that what your plan is when the police show up at the door and arrest you, because that can happen, mm-hmm. whether you think it's a lie or not. And at that point, I could tell he took it seriously. And, not to keep on with that piece of it, but eventually what happened was the house we were living in, we hadn't been living in it that long. We had been renting it. And my mom actually helped with that at that point. And I just told him at that point, I had talked to my mom, even though we were estranged. She was willing to help me no matter what our other issues were. And I told him, you need to leave. You need to go. Like, I'm done here.
And he was willing.
No more.
He was willing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so 2 days later, I came home because I had a part-time job now. So I'm like kind of making moves. I came home and that house didn't even have a pencil in it. Like, there wasn't a stick of furniture. There wasn't a pillow. There wasn't a plastic fork. Like, there wasn't a sheet of paper towel. Like, I've never seen a house cleaned out so entirely in my life. And it was the most glorious sight I had ever seen. Like, I was fully happy to sleep on that carpet with no pillow and blanket and just figure it out. Like, he was gone. And of course, you know, there was legal parts and everything that had to be done. But so I was very, very fortunate. By that point, I did have a place to live. Mm-hmm. And I was in a position, I then had someone who was willing to help me pay the rent, get some food until I figured it out. Mm-hmm. If it would have been any of the years prior to that moment, I wouldn't have been in that situation. I would have had to go to a women's shelter, and I would have had to run away in the dark of the night to do it, because he would have, like, in terms of what that would have done to his image and his public image that he, you know, worked on so much. Mm-hmm. There's no way he would have allowed me to get that far.
So, and here's what's interesting. Yeah. We're going to keep going and then we're going to wrap up. But
yeah,
you had a moment where the power shifted for just a moment and you took it.
Yeah.
That would be part of the story as well for people listening. You had a brief moment where you could go and it worked.
Yeah.
You did say, now here's the other thing. There are moments that people don't see, but are there. When I was devastated in my first marriage. I did not have this situation. I don't want anyone to think like I'm saying anything regarding this.
No.
Only part of my first marriage that I will say for people that I didn't see until I looked at it was I was so devastated that he didn't want me to live at the house, that I was going to be by myself, that I wasn't looking at the opportunity given to me. And we didn't have a good marriage. It wasn't good. I'm actually really grateful that he was the way he was. And I don't even think he was that bad. He was just young, you know, and he didn't know any better. He didn't have a place. So he left me without a home and our kids. So I was so focused on, oh my God, what are people going to say? We're getting divorced. I'm so embarrassed and I don't have a place to live. It was the biggest blessing. So for women out there who might have to run away in the middle of the night, what is your advice? Or to anyone in a bad situation, what is your advice for them right now?
It's so hard to give, because what I want to say, what I would want to do myself if I went back, I don't want to give someone else advice that'll put them in danger, right? Because you are very right to think you are in a dangerous position. Mm-hmm. You are. Your gut doesn't feel that way for nothing. Mm-hmm. If you even slightly start to suspect that this is wrong, you're not being treated right, you're not, you know, because I think women spend a long time wanting to fix, wanting to oversee, wanting to make the good, you know, because no situation is perfect. But I would say, yeah, Shylo, you're right. I did have that moment. You're right. I had a little power shift. Never looked at that before. This moment, I had a little power shift and I was so done. I took it, you know, and I didn't care. And I humbled myself and asked my mother, you know, to help me, who I hadn't spoken to. We were very estranged. And she helped me. And not everyone has that. So, and I'm very aware of that. And if you don't have any moment like that, reach out to a shelter at whatever moment you can, that 10 seconds, because they have plans in place for your very situation to get you out of that home, to have whatever backup that requires, whether it's the middle of the night. Those professionals have that plan. So find the number. You have to hide that number. It's not all probably going to happen in one smooth thing, you know, like it's not all going to be the day you phone that number maybe, or the day you write the number down. You might not be ready for a year, you know. It's all on your own time and keeping yourself safe and alive. So, but there, domestic violence awareness is a lot bigger now. And like we said early in the show, it's not just against women. There's a lot against men. But there are a lot of resources, and those people, they don't mess around with it. They'll get you out, and there's nothing they haven't seen that, that you have to be afraid of. So do not, if you don't have to, don't spend that decade in turmoil. That's my advice.
And I am so grateful you came on and shared this. And you are right. But what I would say, what Jayne did, what the best advice is, like she said, is find your support. If you do not have any, you need to seek somebody in that world and get a plan. And it could take a year. It could take 3 years, but get a plan and start seeking support and surround yourself with people you love. If you've been isolated, get out of isolation slowly, however you can, whether it's a Facebook group, maybe you're a part of, maybe it's just a community of people where you don't have to talk about what's going on, but you have support. And that's what's important. We don't want you to get and put yourself in dangerous situations at all. We want you to stay safe. So make sure that you are safe, that you have people surrounding you, and that you are protected at all times. But Jayne Jones, thank you so much. You are an incredible, like I said at the beginning, an advocate, a survivor, an ambassador to women, to your community. You've done incredible things. And if people want to find you real quick, shout out where they can find you, even your Facebook group. And we're going to make sure it's on all of our information as well. But for somebody listening right now who's really wanting to reach out, tell them how they can find you.
Yeah, it's absolutely. If you want to reach out to me and just talk, I'm on Facebook. I am not hard to find. It's Jayne Jones. Jayne is spelled with a Y, so it's Jayne Jones. And my women's group is called Unplain Jayne and Friends. And again, Jayne has a Y in it. So if you just want somebody to talk to, I am a mental health peer support advocate, and maybe I'm not sure if we live in the same country, but I can help you find resources wherever you are.
Fabulous.
And Shylo, thank you so much. I just thank you so much for helping me, tell this story in a safe space and bring awareness. And in Canada, it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So kind of just works out that this was the time to tell the story.
Well, it was perfect. And I'm only 3.5 hours from Canada, so I count myself a Canadian every now and then, eh? Every now and then. They think I'm Canadian. When I go to Canada, they think I'm Canadian. So whenever I talk, because I can't speak French well, but I always say bonjour, and they're like, woo, and they think I'm total French, and I'm like, nope, I'm not. I'm a French Canadian, but I can't speak the language quite yet, but I'm learning. But Jayne Jones, thank you so much. We will put all her information out there. If you know anyone who is in a serious situation, please reach out to somebody who can help you with advice. Don't do things on your own. If you are a person who needs this, contact Jayne, contact somebody in your community, get with your family and some support. And this has been another incredible episode of Grit and Grace. I am Shylo Bijold, coming at you with an incredible human being, my friend Jayne. And we'll catch you on the next one.
Glutathione is a big word. It's the body's own master antioxidant. It's a scavenger for free radical, bacteria, and viruses. There are no products in the market with the ingredient NASET. NASET increases the production of glutathione that's in our body already to strengthen and enhance our immune system, elevate sense of well-being, support muscle strength and endurance, cognitive function, and liver support. It helps with increased energy and blood sugar regulation. Get your bottle of GSH Plus from www.salvationnutra.com.